I went hiking in late October because I needed to be alone in a way that my apartment and my phone would not allow. I had taken a week off work without telling anyone. I packed light, left early, and chose a trail I found on an old state park map that showed it as seasonal access only. The road leading to the trailhead was gravel and broken, with weeds growing up through the middle. There were no other cars when I parked. The air smelled damp and cold, the kind that settles into your clothes and stays there. The trail started narrow and clear, but the ground was already layered with fallen leaves. Oak and pine mixed together, blocking most of the light even though it was mid-morning. The quiet felt thick. No wind, no distant road noise, no voices. Just my steps and my breathing. I remember thinking it felt like walking into a closed room rather than open land. After about an hour, the trail markers stopped appearing. The path was still there, but it looked older, less maintained. Branches hung low, and the soil was packed hard with no fresh footprints. I checked my map and confirmed I was where I planned to be. I kept going, telling myself that was the point of choosing a place like this. Around midday, I noticed something that made me stop. A small stack of stones sat beside the trail, arranged carefully. They were clean, no moss, no dirt. Someone had placed them there recently. I looked around, scanning through the trees, but nothing moved. I told myself it was probably another hiker marking a turn or a shortcut. Still, the trail was officially closed for the season. That detail stayed with me. As I moved deeper, I began to notice other signs. A snapped branch at shoulder height, the break still pale. A boot print pressed into a muddy patch near a creek crossing, sharp-edged and fresh. It wasn't mine. I wear a different sole pattern. The print pointed the same direction I was heading. I slowed down without fully deciding to. My steps became quieter. I paid more attention to sound. The forest still felt silent, but now it felt like the kind of silence that waits. I told myself that was just nerves. I hadn't slept well the night before. I kept going. The trail climbed into higher ground where the trees thinned and the wind picked up. The temperature dropped. I stopped to eat and drink, sitting on a fallen log. That was when I noticed something tied to a tree about 20 feet off the trail. Bright orange paracord. New, clean. It looped around the trunk and hung loose, like someone had started to set something up and never finished. There was no sign of a tent or camp nearby. I stood and walked closer. The cord was cut cleanly at the end. No fraying. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with the cold. I looked farther into the trees and saw another piece of cord tied higher up, then another farther down the slope. They formed a loose line parallel to the trail, always just inside the tree line. It looked intentional. It looked measured. I stepped back onto the trail and continued, faster now. I didn't want to think about what the cord could be for. I told myself it might be part of trail maintenance or survey work left unfinished. Still, I kept glancing to the side, tracking that invisible line through the woods. By mid-afternoon, the light had shifted. Shadows stretched long across the ground, and the forest darkened faster than I expected. The trail narrowed again and dipped into a shallow valley where the air felt colder and heavier. The ground was damp, and my boots sank slightly with each step. That was when I smelled smoke. Not old smoke. Fresh. Wood burning. I stopped and listened. I heard nothing. I moved forward carefully, following the smell until I saw a clearing about 30 yards off the trail. In the center was a fire pit, still warm. Ashes were gray and loose, with small pieces of unburned wood resting on top. Someone had been there recently, very recently. Near the fire pit sat a backpack. Dark green, heavy duty. It was upright, zipped, and clean. No rain had touched it. I did not open it. I did not touch it. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at it, feeling exposed in the open space. Whoever owned it was close enough to come back at any moment. I backed away slowly until the trees closed in around me again. My heart was pounding hard now. I decided then that I would turn around at the next clear marker or bend. I had gone far enough. As I returned to the trail, I noticed footprints again, clearer now, multiple sets. They crossed the trail and continued uphill in the direction I had just come from. They were not moving away. They were moving toward the area I had been heading into earlier, toward the fire. I turned around and started back the way I came, walking fast but controlled. I focused on my breathing and my footing. I told myself not to panic. The trail was familiar now. I knew what was behind me. After 15 minutes, I realized something was wrong. I should have reached the creek crossing by then. I hadn't. The trees around me looked similar, but the ground felt different. The trail curved in ways I did not remember. I checked my map again. According to it, I should have been descending, but the land kept rising. I stopped and looked back. The path behind me was narrow and uneven, with leaves disturbed in places that did not match my steps. I felt watched, not imagined, not vague. It was a physical sensation, like pressure between my shoulders. I moved again, this time off the trail, heading downhill through thicker brush. I wanted open ground. My legs burned as I pushed through low branches and loose rock. I slipped once and scraped my palm on stone. The pain felt grounding. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps, but weight shifting. Leaves pressed down slowly, deliberately. Came from above me on the slope. I froze and listened. The sound stopped. I stayed still for a long time. My breath fogged the air in front of my face. My fingers went numb. I knew that staying still too long would be worse. I moved again, angling downhill until I broke into a wider path. Not the main trail, a service road, overgrown but clear. I followed it without hesitation. The light was fading fast now. The trees opened enough for me to see a stretch of road ahead. When I reached it, I did not stop running until my legs forced me to. My car was still there, alone, untouched. I unlocked it with shaking hands and got inside, locking the doors immediately. I sat there for several minutes, listening, watching the tree line. Nothing emerged. I drove out as soon as I could steady myself. The gravel road felt endless. When I reached pavement, the relief hit me so hard I had to pull over. I reported what I saw to the park office the next day. They told me no maintenance crews were scheduled in that area and no permits had been issued. They thanked me and said they would look into it. I never heard back. I never returned to that trail. The map still sits in a drawer at home, folded open to that section. I have not closed it since. I went hiking because I had just quit my job and needed to clear my head. I had been working warehouse shifts for almost 6 years straight, nights that bled into mornings, lifting and scanning and moving until my body worked on habit instead of thought. When I finally walked out, I did it between shifts. I left my badge on the desk, emptied my locker, and didn't tell anyone where I was going. I drove north without a plan, slept in my car in rest areas and pullouts, and followed back roads until my phone map stopped suggesting places. Late on the second day, I turned onto a forest road and saw a faded wooden sign nailed to a post, half covered by lichen. The lettering was old and shallow, like it had been carved instead of painted. I couldn't read the trail name from the road. I took it as a sign that I didn't need one. There were no other cars at the trailhead. No metal box for permits. No map board. Just a wide patch of dirt and a narrow path cutting into thick pine and fir. I checked the time. It was 11:20 a.m. The sun was high, but the trees swallowed most of it. I locked my car, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the trail without stretching, without warming up, without thinking much at all. The first stretch felt normal. Needles underfoot, dry air, the smell of sap and dust. The trail climbed slowly, never steep enough to feel like work. I remember noticing how quiet it was. Not in a peaceful way, just flat. Midday quiet, the kind where birds take breaks and wind pauses. My own breathing sounded louder than it should have, like the trees were pushing it back at me. About 2 hours in, I started paying attention to the ground. It wasn't soft the way forest trails usually are. It was packed down hard, smooth in places, almost polished. It looked like heavy foot traffic had worn it that way, but there were no prints. No boot edges, no hoof marks, no bike ruts, just dirt pressed flat across the width of the trail, as if something wide had passed through again and again with enough weight to erase detail. I stopped and crouched to look closer. The surface was uneven in a way that didn't match walking. The sides of the trail were sloped inward, like whatever had moved through tended to drift instead of step. I told myself it was erosion or maintenance equipment from years back, even though I hadn't seen a single cut stump or blaze mark since starting. I kept going because turning around felt like admitting something was wrong, and I wasn't ready for that yet. A little farther on, I saw a side path. It wasn't marked, but it was there. Narrower than the main trail, lighter in color, worn enough to look intentional. It angled downhill and cut between younger trees where the growth was tight. I stood there longer than I needed to, weighing the idea of shortening the loop I assumed existed. I had water. I had daylight. I stepped onto it. 10 minutes later, my phone lost signal. The change was instant, like a switch. I didn't need the phone for navigation, but I noticed the screen anyway. The empty bars where there had been one weak line before. I slipped it back into my pocket and kept walking. That was when the forest started to feel wrong. Not scary, not threatening, just hollow. The air felt thicker, like it didn't move unless I did. I realized I hadn't heard an insect in a while. No buzzing, no clicking, no rustle of small things in the brush. Even my footsteps sounded muted, like the ground was taking the sound instead of reflecting it. The trees along that shortcut were different. Straighter. Their trunks carried long vertical gouges, deep and pale against the darker bark. The marks were too high to be from tools and too clean to be from random damage. They ran parallel 3 or 4 lines at a time, repeated on tree after tree at the same height. I ran my fingers along one set and felt how smooth the wood was inside the scar, rounded by time and weather. I tried to match the height to something reasonable. An elk rack, a bear standing, logging cables. None of it lined up cleanly. The spacing was wrong. The height was wrong. The repetition was what bothered me most. It looked practiced. The path narrowed until it barely deserved the name. Then it ended, not in a clearing, not at another junction. It stopped at a wall of brush so dense it felt untouched. No broken stems, no pushed branches, just a solid weave of green and brown. I stood there, breathing, listening to nothing, and felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with effort. I turned around. The way back did not match the way in. The ground sloped differently. The trees felt closer together. I walked longer than 10 minutes without seeing the main trail. When I reached the spot where I thought the shortcut met it, there was nothing. No opening, no lighter dirt, just the same packed surface running straight ahead, unchanged. I started moving faster, not running, but no longer wandering. I checked my watch. More time had passed than I expected. The sun looked lower through the branches, the light flatter, stretched thin. I followed the main trail downhill, then uphill, then across a ridge that I didn't remember climbing. My water ran low. I slowed again to manage it, but my focus kept slipping. The forest stayed quiet. Too quiet. My thoughts circled tight, stuck on the gouges, on the smooth dirt, on the way the shortcut had vanished like it had never existed. It took nearly 3 hours to find a section of trail I recognized. A fallen log with a split trunk. A bend where the ground dipped and held damp leaves. Relief came late and thin, but it came. I followed that familiar stretch back toward the trailhead with care, counting steps between landmarks, forcing myself to stay present. By the time I saw my car through the trees, it was dark, not dusk, full dark under the canopy. I checked the time again, certain something was wrong with my watch. Sunset wasn't supposed to be for hours. I stood there longer than I should have, letting my eyes adjust, listening for sounds that never came. I unlocked the car and sat inside with the doors closed, breathing air that smelled like plastic and old fabric. The quiet outside pressed against the windows. When I finally started the engine, the dash clock showed a time that made sense with how tired I felt, not with how the sky looked. I didn't camp there. I drove back down the forest road until I reached pavement and a gas station with bright lights and noise that felt almost violent after the silence. I slept in the car with the engine off and the radio on low, just to hear something human. Later, when I looked up the area on a real map, I found notes about old logging routes, decommissioned trails, and wildlife corridors that didn't show up on public guides. Heavy equipment had moved through parts of that forest decades ago, compressing soil into hard lanes that never fully softened. Large animals followed those paths because they were easy, wearing them smooth in a way that erased prints instead of leaving them. The gouges matched the height of machinery arms and cable lines that had swung and scraped during repeated passes, scars that trees healed around but never forgot. The shortcut wasn't a trail. It was a maintenance access line that had been reclaimed unevenly, visible from one angle, invisible from another. Without markers, without sound, without movement, my sense of direction had slipped just enough to stretch time and distance apart. Fatigue and stress filled the gaps. What scared me most wasn't being lost. It was realizing how easily a place can guide you without intention, how a few wrong assumptions can bend your path until it no longer matches memory. The forest didn't trap me. It didn't chase me. It simply followed its own patterns, and when I noticed them too late, it allowed me to leave because I finally stopped moving the way it expected. We planned the hike as a clean break from work and screens, a short loop trail someone had posted about years earlier on a forgotten forum. It sounded quiet and overlooked, which was the point. 3 of us took Friday off and drove into the Appalachian region without naming a state, without checking updates, trusting an old map screenshot and a rough description. We agreed to carry one phone sealed in a bag for emergencies only. The rest stayed in the car. The plan felt simple and controlled, like a reset. July heat wrapped around us the moment we stepped out of the car. The air felt thick enough to lean on. The trailhead sign was faded and split down the middle, letters bleached to the color of bone. No other cars. No recent boot prints. The first mile cut through dense green growth, the kind that presses close and hides the sky. Cicadas screamed without pause. Sweat soaked through our shirts before we reached the first bend. Everything felt normal in the way hard hikes do, where discomfort means progress. We moved at an easy pace, stopping often for water. The trail markers were old wooden posts with peeling paint, but they were there. The loop made sense on the map. The ground showed signs of past use without looking fresh. We crossed a narrow creek over slick stones, then climbed into thicker woods. The smell of rot and wet soil followed us. Sunlight broke through in short flashes. We joked in our heads about how quiet it would be at night without phones, how deep sleep would come easy. By late afternoon, the air grew heavier. Clouds gathered but never broke. Around 6:40 p.m., we found a flat patch near another creek, wide enough for our cheap tent and close enough to water to refill bottles. The spot looked used before. Fire ring collapsed, logs dragged into a rough circle. We set up fast, wanting to eat before dark. The forest shifted as the light faded. Insects grew louder, then settled into a steady rhythm. Water moved over rocks with a soft, constant sound. After dark, the woods felt tighter. The headlamps cut narrow tunnels that ended too close. We turned them off to save batteries and sat in the dim glow of a small lantern. The heat did not fade. Sweat cooled and turned sticky. The sounds around us stayed busy for a while, then changed. It started as movement in the leaves beyond the light, slow and measured. Not a crash, not a stumble. A steady pace that traced a wide circle around the campsite. At first I assumed it was an animal checking us out. Deer passed through camps often. Bears announced themselves with weight and noise. This sounded different. Each step landed with intent. Leaves pressed down instead of scattering. Twigs bent and broke in sequence, spaced evenly, like someone counting without numbers. The pattern stayed wide, always just outside the lantern glow. It did not approach the tent or the food. It did not retreat either. Minutes passed. The circle continued. The air felt wrong, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with humidity. I focused on the creek to steady myself, but even that sound felt muted. The insects kept up for a while, then thinned. A frog croaked once and stopped. The circling did not speed up or slow down. No sniffing, no sudden movements, just the sound of weight moving through undergrowth with control. Around midnight, the movement stopped. Not faded, not drifted away. It ended in a final step and then nothing. The silence hit all at once. The insects dropped out as if a switch flipped. The creek kept flowing, but it sounded far away, flattened. I could hear my own breathing too clearly. The space where the sound had been felt occupied, like someone standing still and waiting. Time stretched. I checked the dark without turning my head, trying to catch motion in peripheral vision. There was none. The forest stayed locked in silence. No wind, no leaves shifting, no small life returning. The stillness pressed in until my muscles ached from holding tension. At some point, exhaustion forced my eyes closed. Sleep came in broken pieces, shallow and alert. Morning light broke through the trees early, pale and thin. The forest sounds crept back in slowly, as if testing the air. Insects resumed. Birds called from a distance. I crawled out of the tent with stiff legs and a dry mouth. The creek looked the same as before, clear and moving fast. The ground near the bank held soft mud where water had pulled back overnight. That was where we saw the footprints. They came from upstream and crossed the mud in a straight line before fading into firmer ground. Bare feet, no shoe marks. The toes were long and spread wide, pressed deep. The heel impressions sank further than expected, oval and heavy. The stride length was longer than normal, each step placed with balance. The arch showed faintly, stretched, like the foot flattened under weight. They were human in shape without looking right, as if someone with unusual proportions walked through without care. We scanned for other signs. No drag marks, no broken branches near the prints, no trash. The prints did not circle the camp. They passed through once, clean and direct, close enough to the tent that a single step would have crossed our gear. The fire ring looked untouched. The food bags hung where we left them. Nothing was missing. We packed fast. No one suggested breakfast. The air felt watched again, though nothing moved. When we stepped back onto the trail, something else stood out. The loop markers were gone. Not fallen, not snapped. The wood posts remained, but the painted symbols were scraped off down to bare grain. The cuts looked fresh, shallow gouges in a consistent pattern, as if done with a blade or a rough tool. Every marker we passed showed the same treatment. No wrong turns pointed out. No guidance left. We relied on memory, and the map screenshot burned into my head. The trail itself stayed visible, worn by years of feet, but every sign that confirmed direction was erased. The forest closed in tighter than before. Humidity climbed. Sweat returned. Each bend felt wrong, like it could drop us into the same place again. We moved with purpose, checking the sun, counting time. The hike out took longer than it should have. The trail felt stretched, hills steeper, flats shorter. When we reached the creek crossing near the start, relief hit hard enough to shake. The car waited where we left it, alone and dusty. The trailhead sign looked smaller in daylight, more fragile. We drove away without stopping. The phone stayed sealed. No emergency needed to be reported. Later, after showers and sleep, I thought through every detail with care. The sounds fit a person moving with intent. The prints matched someone barefoot and strong, used to uneven ground. The erased markers suggested knowledge of the trail and a desire to confuse without causing direct harm. The silence could be explained by animals reacting to a human presence. Nothing supernatural needed to fill the gaps. The most likely explanation settled into place over time. Someone lived out there, moving through the woods with familiarity, avoiding roads and people, marking territory by removal rather than signs. Circling the camp would have been a way to assess without confrontation. Standing still in the dark would have been enough to remind us we were not alone. Crossing the creek in the morning would have been a check to see if we were gone. We never filed a report. There was nothing concrete to give. No threat made. No property damaged. The forest absorbed the evidence quickly. The mud dried. Rain came and washed it clean. The trail markers stayed scraped for who knows how long, a quiet warning to those who noticed. None of us talked much after that hike. The shared silence settled in without effort. We still hike, each of us, but never together and never overnight. Day trips on busy trails feel safer, louder, claimed. The woods remain beautiful, dense, alive. They also hold space for people who choose to disappear into them, who watch without being seen, who move with control and patience. Knowing that changed how I walk through trees. I stay aware of sound, of silence, of the ground under my feet. I leave before dark. I treated hiking like training, not escape. It was mileage, elevation, heart rate, recovery time. I wore headphones and kept my eyes forward. Trees were background. Views were irrelevant. The trail was a surface to move across. Nothing more. That mindset worked for months. Kept emotions out of it and made long days feel manageable. The morning that changed things was cold and clear. I started just after 7 a.m., early enough that the parking area held only my car. The air bit at exposed skin and smelled sharp, like iron and wet stone. Snow clung to shaded ground in thin patches, compacted and crusted over from refreeze. The trailhead sign looked new, clean edges, recent maintenance. This was not a remote place. It was a maintained route used year-round. I set a steady pace from the start. Headphones in, music low but present. My breath settled into a rhythm. Boots crunched on frozen soil and thin snow. The trail was narrow but clear, packed down in the center with brush close on both sides. The trees stood bare and tall, their branches rattling lightly in the breeze. Everything felt controlled. About a mile in, I checked my watch out of habit. The GPS map showed my position drifting just off the trail line, a few feet to the side. I assumed it was signal bounce. Cold and tree cover can do that. I centered myself on the path and kept moving. A few minutes later, it drifted again, placing me slightly downslope even though I was dead center. I ignored it. GPS errors happen. As the trail climbed, the snow thickened in patches. Some sections held only a dusting. Others held several inches where the sun could not reach. My boots left clean prints, edges sharp. No other tracks crossed them. The silence felt deep but normal for early morning. Wind moved through branches. Some were far off. A bird called once and stopped. Around the 3rd mile, I noticed my watch buzzing more often than usual, recalculating. The map line twisted slightly, then corrected. I paused to adjust my pack straps and let the signal settle. The screen still showed me offset, like I was walking parallel to the trail instead of on it. I shook my wrist, reset the activity, and moved on. 5 miles in, the trail leveled out briefly before another climb. That was where I saw the campsite. It sat just off the path in a shallow dip, shielded from wind by a low rise. At first glance, it looked like a normal rest spot. Then details started to stand out. A tent lay collapsed and half buried under snow and leaves. The fabric had gone dull and soft, darkened by moisture. One pole snapped clean through, the break white and old. A sleeping pad lay rolled halfway, edges chewed by time. A backpack rested against a tree, one strap torn near the top, fibers frayed and gray. Everything carried a film of mold and dirt that spoke of weeks, not days. What stopped me was the food. A small pile sat inside an open bear bag. Energy bars still sealed. Dehydrated meals unopened. Plastic jar of nut butter intact. Lid screwed tight. Food does not get left behind unless something goes wrong. Even tired hikers pack food out. Even injured ones take it if they can. There were no signs of a fight. No blood. No scattered gear. No drag marks. It looked like someone stood up and walked away without urgency, leaving useful things behind. Snow had fallen after, light but enough to soften edges. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with exertion. I stood there longer than planned, scanning the ground and trees. The forest gave nothing back. No movement, no sound beyond wind. I took a few photos with my watch camera out of habit, then continued. Training schedule mattered. That thought felt thin even as I leaned on it. The climb grew steeper. Snow deepened underfoot. I adjusted my pace to keep traction. That was when I noticed the sound. It came faint at first, almost lost under my own steps. A soft press and release on snow, slightly delayed. Not a crunch like my boots made, but a dull compression like weight settling and lifting. I slowed. The sound slowed with me. I stopped fully and held still. The sound stopped too. I waited, counting breaths. Nothing. I stepped forward again. 2 steps later, the sound returned, keeping a steady gap behind my own rhythm. I told myself it was echo, or my own steps carrying back through the trees. Snow can do strange things with sound. I changed pace, speeding up slightly. The sound matched, staying just off time. I slowed again. It followed. My neck prickled with cold that was not from the air. I removed one ear cup and listened. The forest sounded normal. Wind, branches, my breath. Then the pressure sound again, clear enough to separate from everything else. It did not sound like boots. It did not scrape or slide. It pressed down, paused, and lifted, like a careful footfall. I stopped and turned slowly. The trail behind me stretched empty and white, my prints sharp and centered. No other tracks crossed them. Nothing moved. The trees stood still. I faced forward and continued, telling myself to finish the planned distance and descend. Turning back early felt like giving weight to a thought I did not want. The sound stayed with me as the trail climbed toward a ridge. It never closed the distance. It never fell back. It held steady, a presence measured in timing rather than space. When I paused to drink, it paused. When I stepped, it stepped. I could not hear breathing. I could not hear brush being pushed aside. Only that pressure on snow. My GPS drift worsened as elevation increased. The map showed me well off the trail now, cutting through open slope that did not exist. The signal bars dropped, then returned. I stopped trusting it altogether and focused on markers, which were still clear and intact. When I reached the ridge, the wind hit harder. Snow lay unbroken across a wide stretch, wind-packed and smooth. I stepped off the trail edge to look back down the slope. From that angle, the ground told a different story. My tracks formed a clean line up the center of the path. Just to the side of them ran another line. It was offset by about a foot, never overlapping, never crossing. The impressions were deeper in places, wider at the heel. The stride length matched mine almost exactly. Where I had paused, the second line paused too. The prints pressed slightly deeper as if weight had settled while waiting. There was no wandering, no hesitation, no attempt to hide. The line followed with precision from the point where the snow thickened, beginning abruptly as if something had stepped onto the trail already aligned with my pace. I did not stay to analyze further. The cold reached into my bones. My chest felt tight, breath shallow and fast. I turned and ran downhill, ignoring training plans and form. Snow slid under my boots. My ankle twisted hard on a hidden rock, pain flashing sharp and bright. I stumbled, caught myself, and kept going. The sound behind me changed as I ran. It did not crash or scramble. It stayed measured, still slightly delayed, still controlled. That was worse than pursuit. Suggested choice. I ran until my lungs burned and my ankle throbbed with each step. The trail blurred. Trees streaked past. The sound faded somewhere behind, then stopped entirely when the snow thinned and bare ground returned. I did not slow until the parking area came into view. I reached my car shaking, breath ragged, ankle swelling inside my boot. I locked the doors and sat there until my heart rate dropped and my hands steadied. I did not see anyone emerge from the trees. No footsteps followed me out. Later, after rest and ice and distance, I went over it carefully. The abandoned camp made sense as someone leaving under pressure or disorientation, possibly injured, possibly forced to move fast. The offset tracks could belong to a person skilled at moving in snow, stepping where footing held, matching pace to avoid detection. The GPS drift could be explained by terrain and cover. None of it required anything unreal. What mattered was intent. Someone had been close enough to mirror my movement without revealing themselves. Close enough to leave a parallel record of presence. They had chosen not to close the gap. They had chosen to follow until the environment no longer favored them. I still train. The miles matter. The discipline matters. I just don't wear headphones anymore. I listen now not for fear, but for information. Sound carries truth in the woods. Silence does too. I went hiking because grief made my apartment feel too small. Every sound felt intrusive. Every face carried expectation. I needed space where nothing asked anything of me. The Pacific Northwest offered that kind of distance in October, when fog hung low and the trees absorbed noise. I chose a solo out-and-back trail that cut deep into forest, one that locals described as quiet and repetitive. No views, no summit, just miles of damp ground and old growth. I started late in the morning, letting the fog burn off a little before heading out. The parking area was empty except for my car. Wet leaves clung to the pavement. The air smelled like cedar and soil. Everything felt muted, as if the forest was holding its breath. I locked the car, shouldered my pack, and stepped onto the trail without hesitation. The first miles passed without thought. My body moved on its own. Boots pressed into soft earth layered with needles. Ferns brushed my legs. Moisture collected on my sleeves. The fog thinned and thickened in waves, sometimes lifting enough to show depth, sometimes closing in so tightly that the trail felt like a tunnel. Sound carried strangely. My footsteps sounded closer than they should have, then faded altogether. I checked my GPS out of habit more than need. The trail was clear and well-maintained. Signs stood at junctions, their paint worn but legible. I followed the planned route, letting the steady rhythm pull my thoughts forward instead of inward. The grief stayed present but dull, like an ache that no longer surprised me. Around early afternoon, the light shifted. Clouds thickened again, flattening the forest into layers of gray and green. The temperature dropped a few degrees. I zipped my jacket and kept moving. The trail narrowed as it climbed slightly, then leveled out. At 2:15 p.m., according to my watch, I reached what the GPS marked as mile 7. That was where I saw the journal. It sat on a flat rock beside the trail, placed carefully, not tossed or forgotten. The cover was dark and swollen from moisture. The edges curled slightly. No pack nearby, no other gear, just the journal, resting where anyone passing would notice it. I stopped without meaning to and stood there, listening. The forest offered only the faint drip of water from branches and the soft hush of fog moving through leaves. I picked it up. It felt heavier than expected, the pages thick with damp. The first page held no name, no message, just a date and a distance written in tight, controlled handwriting. The next pages followed the same pattern. Dates, miles walked, notes about weather, notes about terrain. It read like a log kept by someone methodical, someone focused on movement and measurement. A few pages in, the tone shifted. The entries mentioned sounds that did not line up with the environment. Footsteps that paused when the writer paused. Breathing heard at night that did not match their own rhythm. Not panic, not speculation, just observation, written without flourish. The kind of notes someone makes when trying to stay grounded. The dates progressed steadily. The distances stayed consistent. The writing grew tighter, more compressed. One entry noted finding markers altered, not removed but changed just enough to cause doubt. Another mentioned waking to find gear repositioned, not stolen, just moved. The writer questioned their own awareness but kept logging facts. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. The line broke off without punctuation. The page beneath it was blank. I closed the journal and held it for a long moment. The forest felt closer then, the fog thicker. I did not feel watched, but I felt aware of how exposed the trail was, how predictable movement becomes when there is only one direction to go. I placed the journal back on the rock exactly as I found it, aligning it with the grain of stone. Taking it felt wrong. Leaving it felt deliberate. I turned around and began the hike back. The return felt different immediately. The forest had not changed, but my attention had. Every sound stood out. The soft press of my boots sounded louder. The drip of water seemed timed. I checked behind me more often than I needed to, seeing only fog and trees. The trail remained empty. As I descended slightly, I noticed the ground changing. The soil grew softer, darker, more saturated. My footprints pressed deep, edges clean. I took comfort in that at first. Proof of passage, proof of direction. I kept a steady pace, focusing on breath and movement. A mile back from the journal, the fog thickened again. Visibility dropped to a short distance ahead. The air felt colder, heavier. I paused to adjust my pack strap and glanced down out of habit. The ground behind me was smooth. My footprints were gone. Not faded, not softened, gone entirely. The soil looked brushed over, leaves rearranged, needles scattered in a way that erased any clear impression. Ahead of me, my next steps appeared normally. Behind me, nothing. I turned fully and walked back a few steps, scanning the trail surface. The disturbance ended cleanly at a point where the trail curved slightly. Beyond that, the ground looked untouched, as if no one had passed through it all. My first thought was weather. Fog carries moisture. Light rain could soften prints quickly, but there had been no rain. The leaves were damp but not freshly wet. The erasure was too complete, too intentional in its boundary. I moved faster then, not running, but closing the distance back toward the journal site. When I reached the rock, it was bare. The journal was gone. No indentation, no damp outline. The rock looked like any other, slick with moisture, unremarkable. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. The forest held steady. No sudden sounds, no movement, just the same quiet presence it had offered all day. I did not linger after that. I turned back toward the trailhead and kept moving without stopping. The fog thinned as I lost elevation. The ground firmed up. My footprints began to appear again, sharp and clear. I checked behind me often, seeing only my own marks stretching back until they vanished into fog. I reached the parking area as the light began to fade. My car sat alone, unchanged. I unlocked it, got inside, and sat with my hands on the wheel until my breathing slowed. Later, with time and distance, I thought through what had happened. The journal had been placed intentionally, not lost. Someone wanted it found. The careful logging suggested someone experienced, methodical, likely hiking long distances alone. The notes about being followed pointed to a second presence, someone staying just close enough to observe without contact. The erased footprints made sense when I considered the ground conditions. A branch dragged across soft soil would wipe impressions clean. Someone following behind could do that without much effort, especially if they stayed just out of sight. Fog would cover the movement. Sound would be absorbed. The journal disappearing fit that pattern. It was retrieved once it served its purpose. The purpose, I believe, was warning, or testing. Leaving the journal showed awareness of being watched. Taking it back showed control of the situation. The lack of confrontation suggested restraint, not absence. I never returned to that trail. I told no one about the journal. Grief still needed space, but I learned that isolation attracts attention in ways I had not considered. The forest did not change that day. I did. I stopped assuming solitude meant safety.